Senate will come to order. Would ask that unauthorized visitors exit the chamber at this time as the Senate is coming to order. It is now my privilege to introduce and recognize the distinguished Rules Committee Chairman, the Senator from the 53rd.
Mr. President, it's a beautiful day and early on a Saturday. Moment in history. Today, right now, this very day, we're making history. It will be the last time the senator from the 29th will go to the well of the Senate. Come on, that was a good one. The journal's been read and found to be correct.
Thank you, Senator, for your good works on the journal. Is the objection dispensing with the reading of the journal? The reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is the objection confirmation of the journal? Chair is none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators having bills and resolutions to introduce, please bring them to the Secretary's desk at this time. It is now time for the morning roll call. Time for the morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? Chair recognizes Senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we excuse the senator from the 46th for business outside of the Capitol.
46, without objection, Senator from the 46 will be excused. Chair recognizes Senator from the 2nd, from Savannah.
Mr. President, I recommend we excuse the gentleman, the senator from the 10th. He's en route.
10th, without objection, Senator from the 10th will be excused. Are there any other motions to excuse? Any other motions? Senator from the 40th is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to excuse the gentleman from the 56th who's out of the Capitol on business.
56, without objection, Senator from the 56 will be excused. Any other motions to excuse? Senators, please signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The Secretary will unlock the machine. Senator from the 38th, are you ready? It is now time for our morning devotion. Time for our morning devotion. I ask that senators please take your seats. Cease all audible conversation at this time as we are preparing the chamber for our morning devotion. It is now my distinct honor to call upon the senator from the 38th for the purpose of leading us in our pledge and introducing our chaplain of the day. Senator.
Thank you. Pledge of Allegiance. We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Georgia Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much. We have the honor this morning of having Dr. Charles Gardner. He has served 5 different United Methodist churches in North Georgia. Most recently, Pastor Gardner was an associate pastor at Northside United Methodist Church in Atlanta. He previously served as the youth pastor at Calhoun First United Methodist Church of Pine Mountain First United Methodist, and as an associate pastor at Peachtree Road United Methodist Church, and the pastor of the historic Atlanta First United Methodist Church. He holds a BS degree in construction management from Georgia Tech, a Master's of Divinity from the Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and a doctorate of ministry from the Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Pastor Gardner is a native Atlantean and resides in the Spring Lake neighborhood of Atlanta. Along with being an avid runner and golfer, he enjoys spending time with his family. As together they pursue their passion for travel, and I enjoy that too, theater, I enjoy that too, and sporting events, I don't do. He is currently on sabbatical, working on several projects, including a book on politics and religion. It is my honor and pleasure to present to you our pastor of the day, Dr. Gardner.
Good morning. It is such an honor and a privilege to be with y'all this morning. I thought I'd had my last chance for the year, as I suspect some of y'all thought you did too. But we are here, and if I may, just a moment of privilege. I've had the opportunity several times during Lieutenant Governor's time in office to serve, and thank you always for your gracious hospitality. I've been privileged over the years, too, to serve, and have had several of the senators who have introduced me, Senator Butler, Senator Tate, my senator, Senator Jordan. And my first time I served, or Senator Tate, and then Senator Tate's my senator, and Senator Butler was actually the first senator to introduce me. My home district is her district, or where I grew up. And so, and then, if I may, too, during my time at Atlanta First United Methodist Church, occasionally Justice Hines and Mrs. Hines would come and worship with us. And so it was a great loss to our state. He was an incredible man. He came in and he would sit at the side, and he would do so trying to stay out of the way and below the radar, but he would always come out and was so gracious to me. And so I know that we all mourn his loss and celebrate the many ways that he served our great state. So to Lieutenant Governor, to all of you senators, to the Secretary of the Senate, grateful for this opportunity to be here once again. And we enter into the week of Thanksgiving, and this is a favorite time of the year for so many of us. And I give thanks for so many different things. In the Christian Bible, in the Gospels, in the Gospel of Luke, we hear the story of 10 lepers. Jesus enters into a village, and there were 10 lepers there at the edge of town who weren't allowed to be part of the normal course of the daily life. And they shouted out to Jesus, "Jesus, have mercy on us." And he said, "Go and show yourself to the chief priest." And as they were traveling to see the priest, they looked down and realized that they had been made whole. They'd been made clean. They'd been healed. The one, a Samaritan, having realized what had happened, ran back, fell at the feet of Jesus, and just thanked him profusely. He showed his gratitude. And this is the week in which our country, our state, our communities give thanks for the many blessings that we share in life. So I thought I would just share a few of the things for which I'm grateful this morning. I'm grateful for my faith. For without my faith, the rest of life would be pretty dadgum difficult some days. I'm thankful for my family, my wife, who is so supportive. When I said I wanted to take a little time off to write, she said, "Well, I got some other projects for you too." So we're working on her list and my list, which is fun. My son, who is this morning is at a debate at Westminster here in Atlanta, is taking on debate and is so good at it, and we're so proud of him. Without family, I don't know that life has a lot of meaning. Friends who support me and encourage me, I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful for an ice-cold Coke on a hot summer day. I'm thankful for men and women who put themselves in harm's way to protect our communities. The Georgia State Patrol, who are just outside these doors this morning, paid me such a warm welcome. Thankful for those who go where there's trouble. This past week, my neighbor's tree came down across our street, and within minutes, Georgia Power was there. And within a few hours, the city of Atlanta had cleared the trees. The linemen had, in the cold, wet, rainy afternoon, had gotten our power restored. And I know that Part of our business this week is helping those who have been impacted by the hurricane, and a part of that has been all of the people of faith, all of those of goodwill who have gone to South Georgia and to the Panhandle. We also remember our brothers and sisters on the West Coast and the devastating fires that have ravaged California. In all of those things, I give thanks for the people who help. I was flying back from a trip and finally got to see the Mr. Rogers documentary. And as you know, Mr. Rogers always said, when things happen in the world that are bad, always look for the helpers. And we've seen that in so many ways in our state and in our country in the months that have gone by. So I'm thankful for a lot this morning. I'm thankful for each of you for answering the call to serve. You leave your families and your businesses and your communities, and you come to the state capitol and you make decisions on our behalf. And for that, we are also extremely grateful. I'm thankful for the ability to get up, to see the sun rise, to spend time with friends, to have a vocation that inspires me and challenges me. Found a quote that I want to share with you in closing. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial into acceptance. It turns chaos into order. It turns confusion into clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger to a friend. That was Melody Beatty. When we are grateful, when we express our gratitude, when we give thanks, that which is not enough can be more than enough. It can be sufficient for all our needs. So as we all together enter into this week of Thanksgiving, I invite you to, in your own hearts and minds, to think about the things for which you are grateful and to give thanks. Will you pray with me? Almighty God, what a privilege it is to stand in this place, in this beautiful room, under the dome of our great state, the capital of our great state, as these senators will hopefully finish their deliberations today and return to their homes. Give them safe travels. Be with them. May they know of your grace, your mercy, and your wisdom. We continue to pray for those who recover from the storms that ravaged our state and others. We pray for those who have been devastated by the fires in California and all those in between the great coasts of this great country who this morning suffer, who are in need. May the helpers, may those of us who are able find ways to make a difference in their lives. May we, out of our gratitude, share out of our abundance, that they too may know a peace. And, oh God, that is what we pray for most. We pray for peace in our homes, in our communities, in our state, in our country, in our world. May your peace pervade all those places so that we might give thanks and acknowledge you in all that we do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Appreciate you so much, yeah. Best wishes on that book, too, man. Calling you up on it. Are there any unanimous consent? Senators wishing to rise on a point of personal privilege. Senator from the 14th will be recognized on a point of personal privilege.
Good morning, Mr. President. Let me begin by congratulating former Secretary of State on becoming our next governor. You see, I'm reading a book here called View from the Top that provides some incredible wisdom as we look at great leaders and how they shape the world. You see, great leaders focus on others rather than themselves. They put the people they were elected or hired to lead first. Regardless of whether they came from or what life experiences they may have encountered, they never see themselves as a victim or a martyr. As we move past this special session and quickly into Thanksgiving and Christmas, Mr. President,
The senator's having difficulty hearing. If y'all will quieten down, I know some of you may not want to listen to what he has to say, but please keep your voice down.
as we move past this special session and quickly into Thanksgiving and Christmas, let us focus our attention away from lawsuits, personal attacks, and what we are elected to do. That is to serve those that need our help. You see, we're in a warm building right now, but yet we have thousands of Georgians in South Georgia struggling to cope with the aftermath of Hurricane Michael, and they're looking to us to lead. We don't need more rhetoric or activism, but we need to get busy together as one Georgia, helping these people restore their lives and once again give them hope. Ladies and gentlemen, my hope and my prayer is that when we leave today, we can go enjoy Thanksgiving and we can continue to think about those that are not in this building but are relying on us. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator 29th on a point of personal privilege.
I know the chamber is filled with great sadness as I deliver my final point of personal privilege. I just want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm thankful to you, Mr. President. I'm thankful for every member of this body. I know sometimes we disagree and have debates. We may have some today, but I have just been blessed by the friendships and the example that everyone in this room sets. Thank you. Have a great Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Hey, 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 hey. Record time, ladies and gentlemen, record time. Chair recognizes Senator from the 11th, gentleman from Americus. 13th, I'm sorry. I think the 11th does want to.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a moment to recognize some special people who are here today, and that's our Capitol Police and the state troopers that are out there. If you recall, earlier this year, we had a deranged individual come and set himself on fire here at the Capitol, and they had to handle that. And each and every day, they handle a lot of things to help keep us safe when we're here to do the people's business. So I would ask that you join me in a round of applause for our Capitol Police and state troopers.
Here, here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from Bainbridge, senator from the 11th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be very brief, and I'll reserve my opportunity to speak a little later about my district during the debate on the bills on the floor. But I did want to let everybody know that I've put a letter on your desk. A lot of people have reached out to me and asked what they could do for Southwest Georgia. I've talked to a lot of people who've been through similar disasters trying to figure out what's the best way to make the most difference going forward. And all of them have told me that the thing that gets damaged the most but fixed the slowest is housing, especially for low income and moderate income people. And so my brothers and I have gotten together and established a foundation to try to raise money, and we'll get expertise to help us with a program to keep people in their homes that they've invested their life savings in. And one of the dangers in our rural communities is if people don't have a safe place to live, they're going to move away. And that's just going to exacerbate the flight out of the rural communities that we're forced because of economic reasons. So I would certainly ask you, the senator from the 53rd, who's not at his desk, I don't know where he is, but you know, every now and then he says something that's wise. And he said, Dean, this place is all about relationships. Yeah, every now and then. I did say that. But he has said that you know, this place is built on relationships, and every one of you have relationships with people who are successful in this state, successful in this country from an economic standpoint. And I would ask you, as a personal favor for the senator from the 11th, to reach out to those people, ask them in this season of giving and thanks to sit down, go on the internet, find this website, and send some money so we can keep the roof over the heads and the folks in my district warm and dry through this difficult winter that they'll be facing. I appreciate everybody's consideration, and thanks so much for everything you've done for me this week. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes President Pro Tem of the body, the senator from the 39th, on a point of personal privilege. 49th.
Mr. President, I'll yield my time to the senior members of the chamber, if they could come forward.
Wait. All right. I'm not quite sure what this is all about, but Chair will recognize the senator from the 53rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we know we're here to help the people, and senator from the 11th and what's your district? What's Brady Palestinian's district? 12th and all those in Southwest Georgia. But we're also here to recognize our true leader that's been with us for how many years? 12? As Lieutenant Governor, Casey Cagle. On behalf of the entire Senate, we'd like to present this Rolex watch for your service and the love that we have for you.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. All right.
And on the back of the watch, it says, State Senator from 1995 to 2006, Casey Cagle, Lieutenant Governor from 2006 to 2018. Wow. So thank you.
Now I'm yielding my time to the senator from Gwinnett.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, it's very difficult for me to get up here and to talk about our President of the Senate and not have tears come down my face. Those of us that stand up here, we are the longest serving tenured senators. And even though this is a precious gift given to you, it really is just symbolic of our love and how much our appreciation and how fairly you have treated all of us during your tenure. And we understand that it's not just you, that you have had, and you've had a vision to have a wonderful staff behind you that has carried on and what is transitioning into a new administration. So with that, I'm going to stop before I start crying and just say thank you. You, especially with the Women's Caucus, you have always listened to our issues. You've always put us first, and we're just very, very appreciative.
I've been drafted again. But that's all right. It's a good service. I just wanted to use my time as well to say how much I really, really appreciate serving with the Lieutenant Governor, both as a senator and his position as Lieutenant Governor. I thought he's treated me extremely fair, and in the final analysis, I think that's what it's all about, how you relate to other people, and other than the partisan stuff, just a minute part of that. For a great deal of the time, we are on the same page, most of us, and we do, and he's done a lot of great things for the great state of Georgia, and we certainly appreciate that. God bless you and Godspeed. Thank you so much.
Over the years, I guess I've introduced Casey Cagle, I don't know, 25 or 30 times, maybe more than that. And I've always said that I watched him come into the Senate as a very young senator and full of vim and vigor and a couple other descriptions that people use I won't use in mixed company. But full of great ideas and full of energy. And over time, I've watched him evolve as a leader as well into a person who's very measured and very level-headed. And that's not something that comes naturally sometimes in politics. But I've watched the way he's treated people of both parties through the years, and I've watched the way he has approached problems, both big and small. And I've always found him to be the same person down there in his chamber behind closed doors as he was up here. Pretty forthright and wanting to do the right thing. That's a pretty good compliment for people in our business. If we leave with that compliment behind us, I think we will have done our job. But Casey, we appreciate your service and your friendship and the leadership that you've brought to our state. You leave it a better state than you found it, I can tell you that. Thank you so much.
I have been honored to serve with our Lieutenant Governor for quite a while now. When I first came in with Senator Butler, we both came in at the same time. He was a senator like I was. And then he became Lieutenant Governor. He has served us as it has already been said. He's done the right thing. He's looked out for us. Whenever I needed to go talk to him about some constituent problem or concern, he was always open. And I certainly appreciated that open door. So I want to thank him for his years of service. I keep asking him what's he gonna do when he leaves. I'm gonna miss him, because most of my time I have spent with him here. So I want to wish him the best. Know he will continue to do good things for us, for the state, and enjoy his family and his life. So I want to thank him and wish him well.
Okay, so everybody's been so serious. When I came in Senate, Casey and I used to sit right back there. I was behind him, though. And when he'd come to the well whining. He'd come back to his seat. I'd say, shut up, Casey. But you know, when it was my time to whine, and I went to his office, you know what he said to me? Come on in, Senator. So I appreciate you, Casey, for being so open whenever I had an issue and I could come to your office, or whenever I had guests and just popped in your office, you said, come on in. So thank you, and I wish you the best for your future. Thank you.
You know, it's been a long, long time that I've known this great man, and I'm going to miss him. Many of you don't know, but I had 2 tenures in the legislature. I won the unexpired term of Arthur Langford in '93, and I came and I saw this good-looking man with the big blue eyes, and he was a senator then. And he was just so gracious all the time, just like many of you, some of you rather. Oh, excuse me. and you know, I really got to know him, and I was here until 2002 when I left to run for Congress and retired and left, and I thought I'd never come back. But in '08, I ended up running again and coming back, and he was the lieutenant governor when I came back. And he was even greater once I got back. So it's been a long time working with the Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and seeing his beautiful family come from little babies to grown people and then grandbabies. And so we've been through a lot together, even though he probably didn't realize that I remember every little detail and how they have evolved into greatness. And I know, you know, when one door closes, another one opens, and he's just gonna keep climbing and climbing. He's gonna be here for us in so many different ways. His legacy will live forever. But you know what? I'm gonna miss him, and so I wanna cry too, but I'm trying not to. I just want you to know, Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, you rock.
Well, thank you all very much. First of all, this is quite a surprise. You know, one, I've never owned a Rolex, could never afford one. Now that I'm getting out of politics, maybe I can buy another one too. But no, you know, as I reflect upon you know, this beautiful timepiece, the thing that I'm reminded of is every time I look at this watch from this day forward, I will be reminded of the time that I spent in this great body and getting to be with each of you and so many others that have come before us, and the great legacies that have been left. And the time in which we have had together has been a time that's been worthwhile for the citizens of our state, and we certainly have strived to leave it in a better place. And so I'm very humbled and honored to have been a state senator and a lieutenant governor, and I will forever love the state senate, and will look forward to coming back and visiting with you guys. But I also am reminded that life is about faith and forgiveness. That's the path forward. And in these time, the moment that I've been able to spend with my family since the election has been quite priceless as well. And I have been so grateful and so thankful for that time. And we will all reflect upon the short time that we've been here, because it does go really, really quick, and be encouraged to make the very most of the time in which we do have. And so it's very fitting to have a beautiful timepiece like this that will remind me of this great body that I love so much in each of you. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Chair recognizes Senator from the 49th.
Mr. President, isn't it true that Senator Mullis bought that timepiece in China?
I didn't check, you know, to see if it was a replica or not. It might have been, but anyways, very beautiful. Yeah, it doesn't have an R for Rolex. I'm not quite sure what that means. No, I think that says Polex. No. Polex. No. Thank you all very, very much. Senator from the 22nd, are you wishing to be recognized? You're recognized this time.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I also echo the sentiment in this chamber. Thank you for your service. It was an honor to serve under you. I also want to be very brief, and I want to talk about HB 5EX, and I will be brief because I know everyone's ready to go root on the Dogs and Jackets and Eagles and other great football schools we have here in Georgia. But I do want to briefly say that normally when we talk about mergers and acquisitions, that's a good thing since we're talking about business here. But I also want to talk about potential merger of two interests that possibly is going to happen, which would be very detrimental to all of us if we don't do better. And those two interests are the merger of interests of those who don't really believe that government has any role other than just protection of people as far as using government expenditures are concerned. There's also those interests who say we can do better and we should spend more money and we should not give away these corporate giveaways and we should spend more money on infrastructure projects and other things of that nature. And these two interests really have been opposed to each other. But both of these interests have something in common, whether they really believe that government doesn't have much of a role at all other than our security, or those who believe that government should have a bigger role in infrastructure. They both have something in common that they keep asking us, what are we doing with all of these tax exemptions and corporate giveaways that we keep doing? And our only answer has strictly been, it's good for business. But both of these interests have started to say lately, on the R side and on the D side, that's not good enough. And so what I would hope that we would do in the next coming session is that we start thoroughly vetting these things, and we're going to have this debate on this particular issue more thoroughly later. But we have to do better as far as telling our people why we continue to do this. I would dare say that we vet our local arts council more thoroughly if they ask us for $2,500 than we vet some of these corporations who are asking for millions. We have to do better. So when these interests merge, these interests of one saying we don't really think government ought to do anything, and these interests that say we think government could do more, but both of them saying, how are you finding all this money to continue to give away to these corporate interests? When both of them are saying that, when those interests merge, if we don't have a better answer, and we haven't done a better due diligence in investigating why we're doing these things, none of us are going to like the results. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 30th. Senator from the 30th.
Mr. President, I move that House Bill 4, Echo X-ray, be engrossed.
House Bill 4EX, read the caption.
House Bill 4EX by Representative Rhodes of the 120th and others, a bill be titled an Act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the OCGA relating to imposition rate, computation, and exemptions from income taxes so as to create a tax credit for certain taxpayers based on certain expenses incurred due to Hurricane Michael and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Moving for engrossment on 4EX. Is there objection? There is objection. All those in favor, rise, stand, and be counted if you're in favor of engrossment. On the motion for engrossment, the yeas are 28 and the nays are 12, and the motion for engrossment has failed. Chair recognizes Senator from the 30th.
Mr. President, I ask that we reconsider.
Senators asking for reconsideration. All of those in favor to reconsider its action on engrossment will rise, stand, and be counted. Rise, stand, and be counted. All those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary will unlock the machine. On the motion for engrossment, the yeas are, reconsideration, 36, and the nays are 16. And the Senate has reconsidered its action on the matter of engrossment of House Bill 4EX, which is in front of us now. All those in favor of engrossment of House Bill 4EX will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary, unlock the machine. Chair recognizes Senator in the 41st. State your inquiry.
Is it a sign of the future when your majority caucus can't even win the first vote of the session, Senator?
On the motion to engross House Bill 4EX, the yeas are 35, nays are 16, and House Bill 4EX has now been engrossed. Secretary will read House Bill 1EX.
House Bill 1EX by Representatives Ralston of the 7th and others. A bill be titled An Act to Amend an Act making and providing appropriations for the state fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2019, known as the General Appropriation Act, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that concludes the order.
Chair recognizes the distinguished senator from the 4th, the Appropriations Chairman, to present the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I bring you House Bill 1EX, and it's been a week. It's been focused on recognizing what all has happened in our state and trying to devise the best way to help those citizens that have been affected by it. And I just want to salute those who worked on this all week. Of course, the governor and his staff, Teresa McCartney, Chris Riley, the chief of staff, who've listened and changed the proposal after listening to to many of you and to members of the House to try to come up with the best package that we could to begin the process of rebuilding a very important part of our state. Let me just take a second and remind everybody how important that southern and southwestern part of the state is. Over the years, the farming activities in California have been affected by the lack of water, and the competition between housing and industry and farming has resulted in the reduction of a great deal of farming. In the extreme southern part of Florida, there used to be a lot of truck farming going on down there, and that has not as big as it used to be, and maybe because of development. I'm not real sure. The importance of southern and southwestern Georgia in the agriculture community is just so impressive. If you look at that sheet that was handed out that shows you the farm gate values of croplands and of crops and production of agricultural commodities that is coming out of southwest Georgia, it is just so impressive. That southwest Georgia, and if you think about it, it's partially because of the little more moderate temperature in that part of the state, and then of course the abundant supply of water that's available, and the great land that they have down there. So it's a strategic importance to our state and to our country that we continue to keep agriculture strong in that part of the state. It's important to our country as well as to our state. So that's a little bit of the background that I've had on my mind all week and just hadn't really discussed it with anybody. But just as you know, on October the 10th, it seems like a long time ago in one respect, but for those people who've been affected, it's been eons ago. Hurricane Michael struck the Florida Panhandle with Category 4 winds. Came right straight out of South America and just went right straight up into the Panhandle of Florida. By the time it continued straight up and slightly to the east, it hit southwest Georgia with Category 3 hurricane winds. If you think about it, Category 3 hurricane winds anywhere from 125 to 150 miles per hour. That rate of speed of winds will just about take down anything. There aren't many things built or many trees or croplands that will withstand a wind of that speed. So this storm left catastrophic conditions in the rural areas and farmland and small communities of southwest Georgia as the storm moved through middle Georgia and exited in east Georgia. State facilities that belong to the state suffered $23.5 million in damages, and the storm really spared no area of life, particularly in that southwest Georgia corner. There's widespread damage to infrastructure, to buildings of all types, and it had a devastating effect on timber, croplands, and other crops like pecans. Overall, agricultural losses in the state total some $2.5 billion in row crops, wood products, timber, and pecan crops and trees. I won't prolong it, but let me just give you a short list of some of the largest losses in agricultural commodities and so forth. So here's a partial list of agricultural losses that occurred in Georgia, but they're heavily located in the southwest corner of the state. Timber losses total $763 million. That's $763 million. Just think about that. Just think about that total and let that sink in a minute. It was $480 million in direct vegetable losses. I was mentioning about the fact that that's a top vegetable and commodity growing area of the country now in that part. Almost $500 million. The cotton industry, and this was the worst possible time because cotton had already started harvesting cotton. It was full blown, ready to be picked, and when the winds went through those fields, it just basically picked the cotton. It actually picked it cleaner than the machines will. If you look at a field of cotton after a machine's been through it, you can still see pieces of cotton, and it still looks a little bit white. You saw these pictures of these fields. It completely removed all the cotton That was $600 million. That's over a $500 million. And when you combine the loss of pecans and the permanent loss of pecan trees, just those two things, these losses total $360 million, and that does not count the future loss of income on the trees that won't produce anymore because they're on the ground. Now, these are not the total losses, just the largest numbers. Local governments were hit with damaged infrastructure and facilities, and critical facilities like local hospitals suffered damage, and I hope that we'll be looking at that issue when the session convenes in January. The Department of Transportation suffered widespread damage of signs. When you think about those signs that are wide on roads nowadays, and the wind catches them just right, they're just like a parachute. They just take right off. They had, of course, tremendous debris to be removed and damages to roadways and bridges as well. Governor Deal called this special session to address the needs of these citizens and these communities in the affected areas. And House Bill 1EX is the appropriations bill that delivers the monetary aid to these areas. House Bill 1EX adds $270.8 million to the FY 2019 budget. That includes $205.8 million in state general funds and $64.9 million in motor fuel funds. This is fiscally sound because the budget that we're under, the FY19 budget, actually only requires 2.2% growth in revenues. And as we all know, the state so far this fiscal year is running 8.8% ahead of last year. So I mentioned in committee yesterday, I'm writing a column this week on things I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for the fact that we are deciding what we need to do, not having to consider whether we have the money to do it or not. Some states would have to balance the cost versus what we're doing. We're trying to do everything we can that we think we need to do, and it has been without regard to the cost, and that's a good thing. So here's a quick review of the bill. There's a total of $69.3 million going into the governor's emergency fund. Most of these funds will be spent providing the state match for federal assistance. There's $42 million of that total that's going to pay the state match for the federal funds from the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Agency that has spent some $213.8 million in aid and direct expenses in the disaster area. Just as an aside, we sometimes forget that the aid we get from the federal government has a match to it. Some of us remember when Katrina hit Louisiana, the state match for the federal aid in Louisiana was over $2 billion. So there is a match to be paid. There's another $9.3 million for the state share of the $37.3 million that other state agencies have spent as well. And also, we need to maybe stop and take a moment to recognize the strong response that state agencies have paid to this storm. You know, over the years, I can remember several emergencies where state agencies really responded and did a great job. The one that sticks out in my mind is the floods of 1994, I believe it was, where we had tremendous flooding again in southwest Georgia, and we had state agencies that responded then. And I think we learned how to work together as state agencies then, and that helped us in the Olympics that came along not long after that. This disaster was no change from that. These agencies, 11 that have contributed to the disaster response, and I just feel compelled to call their names this morning and to recognize them for their assistance. Departments of Agriculture, Department of Community Supervision, Department of Corrections, Department of Defense, Department of Human Services, Department of Human Resources, Department of Public Health, Department of Public Safety, Department of Transportation, the agency we call GEMA, which has got a longer name now, and the State Forestry Commission. All of those responded with equipment, with resources, and 24/7 assistance, and really, I think, made our state proud. The largest piece of the governor's emergency fund is the state match of $20.5 million to match the $82 million in debris removal expenses that has been expended by the Corps of Engineers. Also coming out of the governor's emergency fund is a small amount, $1.98 million, that we're going to cover the local government's share of expenses in debris removal and emergency protective measures. A lot of these communities spend a lot of money on overtime and on providing services in these emergencies as they were without not only power but without communication, and still are in some cases. So this was an extreme cost. They may be receiving some compensation for this along the way federally, but it could be a year or 2 or 3 away. This keeps them in business and helps local governments from suffering. If you think about it too, the loss of income is something we haven't really talked about with local governments, but they're suffering a loss of income because of damage to businesses. These storms have a terrific impact on business that people can do. I remember something from the Katrina thing. There are so many things about Katrina that stick in my mind. One was that AT&T didn't receive $1 of income for 6 weeks after Katrina hit. Just think about any business, and that will happen in businesses in southwest Georgia where they'll be out of business for a while. If they don't have power, in many cases, some of them can't operate. So there's a terrific economic loss as well that we have to consider. So local governments will pay a price in many ways. Anything we can do to assist them, I think we sure need to do it. The Department of Transportation has expended some $31.5 million for debris removal and equipment and repairs and personnel costs. The state's 25% match of that is $7.9 million. Another piece of this disaster bill is $8.9 million in premiums to pay the state portion of liability coverage of damaged state properties. This goes to DOAS. Ironically, we had just lowered the premiums by about this amount last year. So we're having to go back up because of the damage to state facilities as well. As you know, we're self-insured, and then we have to cover our losses and then raise premiums on agencies to make up that difference. There's been a total of $23 million in damages to state facilities, as I mentioned earlier, and we've got to get that repaired and taken care of. The other large portion of disaster relief is going to the Georgia Development Authority for dispersal of aid to farmers and timberland owners. There's a total of $55 million in this budget for disaster relief for Georgia farmers that were affected by Hurricane Michael. The Georgia Development Authority will administer this program, which will focus on trying to keep farmers in business for this next planting year. Additionally, there's $20 million for emergency disaster relief assistance as approved by the Georgia Forestry Commission for cleanup efforts for Georgia timberland owners in counties impacted by Hurricane Michael. There's about listen to this, there's about 2.3 million acres that suffered either severe or catastrophic damage. That's not minimal damage or half damage, that's 75% damage or more. Catastrophic damage. 2.3 million acres. Just think about what a large area that is. In this bill is also $7.4 million for equipment replacement for the Georgia Forestry Commission. They've got about 600 pieces of equipment, and through this emergency and others, they're wearing out their equipment, and this $7.4 million will help replace the aging out equipment that some of it's been perpetuated by this disaster. Additionally, for the Forestry Commission, it's $770,000 to build a consolidated forestry unit to replace the Miller and Early County forestry locations that were damaged by the storm. So this will be a single location taking the place of 2 present county locations. It's going to be located in Blakely, Georgia. I mentioned earlier the funds recognized by DOT of motor fuel funds totaling $69.3 million that will assist the department in the expenditures they have spent in responding to cleaning up and recovery efforts by DOT. And these are only partially reimbursed by the federal government. These are motor fuel funds and not general revenue funds. And finally, excuse me, there's $25 million for the One Georgia Authority for financial assistance to local communities impacted by Hurricane Michael and for statewide economic development assistance, and $15 million for the Regional Economic Business Assistance, or REBA, grants for projects with immediate statewide economic impact. Mr. President, that covers the elements that are in HB 1EX. We have folks here who can answer questions, and I'll certainly attempt to answer any of them that I can. You have a handout, I believe, on your desk that basically is where I got my information from for this address this morning, for this presentation. So anything that we can do to answer your questions, we do it now or later. So, Mr. President, I'll open it up for questions.
Don't think there are any questions, Senator. Thank you.
If not, I urge your adoption of HB 1EX, and let's get this aid going to the citizens of Southwest Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 45th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to talk just a little bit about House Bill 1EX. And I had to look up on Google because I couldn't even remember when the storm struck, because it's been over a month now. And I did look it up, and it was on October the 10th. So here we are. You fast forward and you say to yourself, well, you had a disaster, you had a storm. Well, you get on with your life. I mean, we've gotten on with our lives. Here we are in special session. Everybody's getting ready for Thanksgiving next week. But it's kind of hard to get on with your life. And I'm grateful, out of 11 million Georgians, that there's 56 senators who truly, truly care. And you couldn't probably be further away from that disaster than up here representing metropolitan Atlanta in the northeast corner of Georgia. But it is in our hearts, and we do care, and we are doing something about it. And it's not just us, it's state workers. And that's a little bit about what I want to talk about. And I really didn't know, I'm very close to the senator from the 11th, and I'm even more closer to the senator from the 12th. And I oftentimes tell her I spend more time in her district. Now, you Democrats don't remember that. But I spend more time in her district than I do up there in my Republican district, because if you look at the state of Georgia and you look at Southwest Georgia and you look at the health care and you look at the metrics and where we fit in the whole United States, and you understand that Southwest Georgia has some of the worst, if not the worst, health parameters and statistics in the whole United States. So surely, we do care. And surely, not just during a storm, but every day of the year, we're talking about Southwest Georgia. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to pick on them. We don't want to have to help them. But if the demand is there, and we're Johnny on the spot. And what I wanted to talk about, my sister actually lives, and when I go down and visit these two senators and go to their districts for different stuff that I have to go to down there, my sister lives above Panama City. And as we know, that's where the storm came through, there in between Apalachicola. And she lives not too far from Thomasville and Bainbridge, because when I go down there, it's about an hour away. So my sister lives in a trailer, and my sister didn't evacuate. And I've had to see the struggles that she has gone through, but more importantly, right next door to her, a Hispanic family lives in a trailer also, and a big old pecan tree that they absolutely love. And you notice I say pecan because I spend a lot of time in South Georgia. I've learned not to say pecan. A big old pecan tree fell right through the middle of their trailer. And they pick seasonal vegetables, and they specialize in blueberries down there, picking blueberries. But they have a huge family. They have many kids in their family. The pecan tree went right through the middle of their trailer. Well, guess what? Over a month later, they're living in a tent. They have blue tarps. They're living in the field in between my sister's house and their trailer. They're hooking up their refrigerator and their freezer to my sister's power. They're running a water hose over to the little tent where they got going, and they're waiting on another trailer to be delivered, but they can't get one delivered because it's rained so much, and they can't get another trailer in to be able to provide for them. So we have been helping them, but you know, it really struck home. When you talk about a disaster, you think about a big wide swath, but when you know someone personally, it really touches home because you're thinking about that constantly. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is that Southwest corridor and the highest infant and maternal mortality in the United States. So here we are trying to help a region, help an area, and then lo and behold, you have a disaster come in. And you have to wonder where that's going to move the goalpost. And we already know it's going to move the goalpost backwards. And it's going to take a whole lot of money, millions and millions and millions to try and make a dent in the billions of dollars that have been lost. So I want to talk about DHS, Department of Human Services, and Department of Public Health. And when you start thinking about all this debris and how important it is, and I know we've been talking about the forestry, but when you talk about Bainbridge and Thomasville, and I've spent a lot of times in these little bitty cities, I've spent a lot of time in Clay County, and you think about that debris removal. Well, the first thing, since I've been a former nurse, I thought about, you know, it's not very long until it starts getting warm down there because they're planting crops continuously. They won't plant them now. But as it gets warm, guess what you have? You have mosquitoes. And you know that if you don't remove that debris in these small towns and these small communities, that West Nile virus that we all hate and fear as spreading as an epidemic, this would be the perfect scenario if we don't clean up all that debris. So that's one of the first things, and you don't even think about those down ticket items when you start thinking about a big picture, but then when you get down and you start talking about mosquitoes, you understand how very, very important this is. So then the other thing I want to talk about other than public health and public health assuring, I know in the committee meeting they talked about potable water. They talked about the hospitals in Albany not having potable water. Do you know what potable water means to a hospital system? When you have people on a ventilator, and when you're on a ventilator, this is the tube that goes down into your lungs. It has to be cleaned out. It has to be suctioned out. You have to have water. This is life-sustaining. You can talk about dehydration all you want, but I'm talking about hour to hour to hour, you have to have water. This isn't to flush the commode and for sanitary conditions. This is for life sustainability, and you have to have it. So those are the type of things that DPH does, Department of Public Health. But I want to talk about DFACS and what DFACS does. And as we know, in the prior years under Commissioner Bobby Cagle, we increased the amount of money because we didn't have enough DFACS workers, because DFACS workers actually qualified to be able to get on state food stamps. And that was a very sad situation. So we gave them a raise. So this is the lowest rung probably in state government on the salary scale, unfortunately. These are your caseworkers who actually take care of people. These are the people who do the grunt work. These are the people that are taking care of other people that are even less fortunate. And fortunately, DFACS, they've had, and they sent 300 staff workers immediately. These are people who were working in other areas that weren't affected by the disaster, and they went in, they swarmed in, and 300 workers have been working in that particular area. And they have not only been working during the day, they're not working the regular state hours, they're working till midnight. They're working on Saturday and Sunday.
and they have done a yeoman's job, and that's why I'm standing here, is to say thank you to those state workers who make the least money. They have processed over 27,000 applications so far. And these are applications, most importantly, for SNAP benefits. And if you don't know what SNAP is, that's food stamps in everyday terms. The most important thing, it doesn't do any good to get food stamps if you don't have a place to go and buy or purchase the food that you're eligible for. But that is part of the process, is getting on the rolls so that you can have emergency food. And that's very, very important. Those SNAP benefits so far have totaled $12 million in one-time benefits. That's not people. This is what government is for. Government is for when you need it. And when you need it is in an example of a disaster. These are people who have never been on entitlements before. But when that disaster strikes and you're working day to day and you're making your payments and you pay week to week to week, just like that trailer park people that I was talking about, my sister, you pay week to week. But what do you do the next week when you don't have an income, like the chairman was talking about with the jobs program? The expectation, and I'm going to finish up, the expectation is for DFACS to process 50,000 applications. And that tells you how severe it is and what the storm is, because these people are going to qualify. And fortunately, we have those workers down there with that ability. So what's the most important thing about this storm? We need to learn. We need to learn. Just like the senator from the 12th was telling us, her hospital in Albany needed potable water. They need wells dug so that during the next disaster, they don't have to face these same problems. And God forbid, you know, I've served a long time, and a lot of people in here have served a long time. What if this disaster would have come during the recession? What if it would have struck in 2008, 2009, and 2010? God forbid, we never want a disaster. But if it would have struck when we had no rainy day fund, and that's exactly why the chairman is talking about being so prudent that we always have that rainy day fund, that we always have that accessibility, because we never know when a disaster is going to strike. So the most important obligation and fiduciary responsibility to me is to learn and to listen to these senators in this area where it has been struck, so that we can move forward, so that if another disaster comes, like in Savannah or in northwest or northeast Georgia with tornadoes, that we know exactly what to do. So I implore you, when we sit down at Thanksgiving dinner next week, when we sit down this next week, I'm going and buying my turkey for 69 cents a pound, I hope, at Kroger. But let's think about these people. Let's think about these people. Let's think about these state workers that are going to be working on Thanksgiving Day. Let's think about this debris and these people that are picking up this debris on Thanksgiving Day, and give our graces and say thank you, God, that more people were not in that death toll. But also to answer the responsibility that, yes, when we come back here in January, we are going to be Johnny on the spot. We're not going to forget when that disaster struck in October, that we're going to move forward, that we're going to be better Georgians, and we're going to be Georgians that stand together to answer the call when the call is out there. Thank you very much. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 13th.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to say that I, along with the senator from the 12th and the 11th, and I think they're going to have some things to say as well, all of our districts all our counties in our districts were affected by this storm. And it all started, first thing that happened is people couldn't get out of their houses, and so getting chainsaws on the ground and getting trees cut up so we could get the roads cleared out was the first thing that we had to do. And then we all were scrambling to find generators, and I want to give a shout out to the electrical companies that came in, Georgia Power, the EMCs. They worked very, very hard to restore power as quickly as possible, and we appreciate all their hard work. I want to thank the DOT, local law enforcement, state law enforcement that were on the scene. That's what happens when these emergency situations take place. That's the acute part of it. And then, you know, again, we start loaning generators to one another. Hey, I got power, so who needs a generator? And there's a lot of that was going around. The people of South Georgia came together after this storm or during this storm, as we always do. And I was there in the flood of '94, and we had tornadoes. Senator Sims, the senator from the 12th, had 2 tornadoes last January. So we've been through a lot of things down there, and the people come together and we work together. But I also want to give a special shout out, and I want you to recognize that what we do here matters. If you recall, last year we passed a law saying the Department of Corrections could go out with their chainsaw crews immediately and start helping remove debris. And they did that. They did that this storm. And I called the commissioner at one point of the Department of Corrections because one of my counties had requested some more help. And the commissioner and I talked, and he said, Senator, we got every crew, every chainsaw, everybody we can out working right now, but we will do what we can to help that county that's called in particular, because the most important thing is getting out. The other thing, after you kind of get through the initial stage, you start looking at all the damage that the ag community was certainly very much affected, and that's why we're here today. That's one of the big reasons that we're looking at this bill, and you know, the cotton farmers in particular, as you've heard. And I'll just leave you with this, and I know the other senators want to say a few things, and I want to say the people of South Georgia appreciate this special session and what we're doing here. It matters. It's very, very important. And I am thankful, as the senator from the 4th pointed out, that we are a state that's not having to say, well, how are we going to rob from Peter to pay Paul so that we can come up with this money? But we are looking at using some money that we have in a surplus or that would have went to surplus to be able to do this. That's a good position to be in. I want to keep Georgia in that position. Last thing I'll say is the senator that was just here was talking about pecan trees. I started to correct the governor the other day. He called them pecan trees also. In South Georgia, they're called pecans when we're buying them, but they're pecans when we're selling them. So y'all just keep that in mind. But we certainly appreciate all the support. I sure hope you'll all vote in favor of this bill. Thank you very much. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 12th. Senator from the 12th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to HB 1EX and to also thank my colleagues for all of the calls, all of the aid that you sent to Southwest Georgia, and the real concern that you had for us. But let me just also give you a bird's eye view of what we are dealing with still in Southwest Georgia. We also lost millions of chickens. There were little bitties running around, nowhere to go, and they were going to die because there was no feed for them or water. Those little bitties and chickens had to be corralled, placed in a pit, and buried, because they were no longer good for market. We had one farmer alone that lost over 30,000 pecan trees. And I say pecan because my mother would have a fit if I said anything else. She was a proper Southern lady. Over 30,000 pecan trees. Our timber industry was decimated, and it will take years for that timber to be recouped, for the industry to recoup. Our schools lost instructional time that these children will never be able to recoup. Utilities were lost for weeks, not days. There is a doctor in Clay County with a little rundown doctor's office that was a part of that utility lost, Dr. Karen Kenzel. And Dr. Kenzel called and said, I said, well, let me call Georgia Power. So we were able to get Clay County back online, but Dr. Kenzel's office, because of the age of that building, they couldn't give her electricity, because if they had, it would have burned the entire building down. That's how old and rickety it is. So she had to call in an electrician to take care of whatever was needed in the building prior to getting the electricity turned on. I want to thank my Lieutenant Governor for serving Southwest Georgia even before this emergency. He was always there when we called him, and so was the senator from the 45th. Always, whenever we needed the Lieutenant Governor to come down, and Lieutenant Governor, the back porch is still standing. Where is he? I said the back porch is still standing. Still standing. Our Marine Corps logistics base was hit once again. And this is one of the largest, it is the largest supply chain for the Marines, for the military corps in the United States. And again, we're having to, the federal government is going to have to, once again, go in and rebuild and take care of the losses to the base. There are so many other stories that we can tell. But I just want to thank you all for all that you've done and continue to do. It will take years, not days, not months, for us to be able to be made whole again or to achieve normalcy. But Southwest Georgia is resilient, and we will again become a vibrant community. But the senator from the 11th mentioned a few minutes ago, we're going to lose population because these people will have no homes to go to. They won't be able to afford to build new ones. They don't have insurances. So it's we're at a very crucial and pivotal point in Southwest Georgia. Continue to pray for us. Don't forget us. And we're here because I know that you are sincere about, and the governor's office especially, about what happens and that we do matter in Southwest Georgia. Because there are instances when we really do feel lost and thrown away. But I always remind my folks that you have a legislature that cares, you have an executive branch that cares, and we're going to be made whole again. So thank you so very, very much, all of you, for your continuous attention to those of us that live in Southwest Georgia. Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 11th. He'll be the final speaker on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I've risen several times this week, and so I'll keep my remarks brief. But I do want to again thank the governor, the speaker, and of course our president for their leadership this week in dealing with this very serious issue. I want to thank the senator for the fourth for his remarks. They certainly touched my heart, and I know they did the people back home. I want to bring up just a few points. When I woke up this morning, and I've been waking up 4:30 to 5 o'clock this week for some weird reason, and I'm sure it's got something to do with what we've been dealing with here. But it might surprise some of you, but when I wake up, first thing I do is click on Facebook, and it's not because I care anything about social media in general or what's happening in the political world. But my kids tend to post pictures of my grandkids from what they did the night before, and that's what I look at first thing in the morning. I think the Lieutenant Governor would probably understand that. But this morning when I clicked on, the first picture was a power pole. And it was posted by one of my constituents right outside their trailer that you could see the blue tarp on the side of it. And they said, "Yay, I got a power pole." They didn't have power yet because it was just a pole. But this, as the Senator 45th said, is 5 or 6 weeks later, and we still have people who are celebrating the fact that they had a pole stuck in their yard. I think that brought it home as to why it is important for us to remember why we're here. That there are still people in my area hurting. The economy down there will probably never recover from this blow. I've resigned myself to that. We're going to have farmers who are going to lose their farms over this because they were already in debt from the last couple of years of low commodity prices. We had a storm last year that unfortunately was at this exact same cotton picking time. And many of our cotton farmers lost their crop last year, and 2 years in a row is just devastating. The amount of money that we're putting towards the farmers, $55 million, sounds like a lot of money, but in our world of agriculture, that's a drop in the bucket, and it's only going to help a tiny percentage of the people who are hurting. It's a start, and we look for our federal government to match that money. And certainly want to ask you guys to use your leverage with members of Congress to make sure that they're fighting for Georgia in our time of need. And I want to ask you personally, when we come back into session in January, that we make this also a priority, that we reassess the gaps that we identify and find out what it is that we can do better. I know in our world of medicine, we do a lot of research when we have a bad outcome. We call it a root cause analysis. We try to figure out what went wrong. And we've already identified in our facility many things that we need to do to be better prepared in the future. We found out that our kitchen in our hospital that serves our patients, and we average about 30 patients a day in our acute care facility, we have 110 patients in our nursing home that we have to feed those folks 3 meals a day. We have 400 employees that we have to feed every day. We found out that the generator power that is there to keep the respirators going, and it's there for those critical things, but the refrigeration in our kitchen was not powered. That was something in the past when we've had power outages, it was an hour or 2 hours, 3 hours at the most. We never had power outage for 2-3 days like we did with this storm. Seminole County Hospital had power outage, I think, close to a full week. So these are things that we've got to invest in the infrastructure to make sure we can feed these patients that are laying in their beds and it is their home. They don't have any place to go when you're in a nursing home. That being said, there were no headlines about people in nursing homes dying like occurred in the hurricanes in Florida last year. Our people stepped up and did what they had to do to take care of our patients. And public health and the Georgia Hospital Association deserve a lot of credit because they've been working for years on being prepared for these kind of disasters. and they came out looking very well. But this kind of storm identifies the weaknesses. And if we don't learn from those weaknesses, then we've wasted an opportunity. So again, I would ask you to keep these people in your thoughts and your prayers during the next holiday season, because a lot of them are not going to really have a holiday. I ask you to keep your hearts in mind and pocketbook open when we come back into session next year, and see what else we need to do to try to make sure that these people who are very prideful, as the senator from 45th mentioned, there were people waiting in line in the rain, circled around the building for those SNAP programs, because they had no food to eat and no money to buy it. And these are people who have never gotten anything in their life for free, but they were asking for help because they didn't know what else to do. So these programs that we're talking about are very meaningful, and I appreciate all the support individually you guys have given me this week and for the past 5 weeks, and I appreciate every one of you, and I hope every one of you have a great new year and holiday season. But just, again, as you're enjoying time with your family, please take a moment and think about those that are suffering. Thank you very much.
Let's go ahead with the script. That concludes the debate. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is the objection agreed and report of committee which fair will pass the bill? Chair is none. Report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Are there any questions? Chair hears none, and the main question is order. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary, unlock the machine. Great tribute. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 0. And this bill, having received Republican constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Senator from the 11th, what purpose you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that the House couldn't have a unanimous vote on this issue, and my senators came through in a pinch? And led the way, as usual.
As always, Senate leading the way. Senate leading the way. Thank you, Senator. Secretary will read House Bill 4EX.
House Bill 4EX by Representative Rhodes of the 120th, Powell of the 171st, Rogers of the 110th. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated, relating to the imposition rate, computation, and exemptions from income taxes so as to create a tax credit for certain taxpayers based on certain expenses incurred due to Hurricane Michael and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Finance recommends the bill do pass. Mr. President, that completes the order. Is that the idea?
Chair recognizes the senator from the 20th present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, we live in divisive times, and we have an environment, unfortunately, where groups are trying to divide us, rural versus urban, Democrats versus Republicans, etc. But I've never been more proud of the Georgia State Senate that we are standing as one in one Georgia for our friends that are hurting in Southwest Georgia. So I'm very, very proud of that unanimous vote. I'm here to talk about the more long-term impact of Hurricane Michael. House Bill 1EX gives some immediate relief, but Hurricane Michael, as we all know, is a generational disaster, particularly when it comes to timberland and pecan growers. So House Bill 1EX is more of the immediate need. This deals with more of a long-term need. Georgia leads the nation in private timberland acreage. It's a huge industry in Georgia. As the chairman of Appropriations already told you, Hurricane Michael impacted 2.4 million acres of timberland and pecan farms. Very, very devastating. What House Bill 4EX does is provide for a $200 million, 100% refundable tax credit for those that suffered a casualty loss from Hurricane Michael. There are 28 counties that are eligible for this tax credit, and that's the 28 counties that were in the declaration of disaster for individual assistance. If any of you all need to know what counties they are, I have a chart here, but it's the swath that Hurricane Michael came up through. Pecan trees are included in this, as well as hardwood and pine trees. I've been told if you're selling if you're buying, it's pecans, and if you're selling, it's pecans. So it depends on what side you are on that. In order to be eligible for the credit, you have to show that you are actively growing trees for a commercial venture or for a business, and you have to show a loss between October 9th, 2018 and December 31st, 2018. You have to be in those 28 counties. The tax credit is capped $400 per acre. It is transferable one time, but the replanting has to be in the county where the loss occurred. The idea behind this is to encourage replanting and reforestation. I think that I've hit the high points on this. I know you all have studied this and understand it, but I welcome any questions you may have. And I don't think there are any questions, so I'm ready.
No questions, Senator. Yes.
I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? Is the objection agreed and report of committee which fail pass the bill? Chairs none, report of committee is agreed to. Shall the main question be now put? Any objections? Chairs none, main question is ordered. All those in favor of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed, no. Secretary unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 0. And this bill, having received House constitutional majority, is therefore adopted. Secretary will read House Bill 5EX.
House Bill 5EX by Representative Rhodes of the 120th, Powell of the 171st, and Rogers of the 110th. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to sales and use taxes so as to ratify an executive order of the governor suspending the collection of sales and use tax levied on jet fuel for a period of time to provide for the continuance of such suspension of collection indefinitely, to exempt jet fuel from certain sales and use taxes, to provide a definition, to repeal provisions limiting an exemption from such taxes, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Appropriations recommends this bill do pass. Floor Amendment 1 by Senator Heath of the 31st and others, who offers the following amendment: amend the substitute to House Bill 5EX by replacing June 30, 2019 with December 31st, 2018 on line 126. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 20th present the bill.
Thank you for that previous vote. We are here, of course, to provide disaster relief and aid to Southwest Georgia, and I'm proud of our efforts in that regard. The state constitution, however, requires us to address any executive orders between the last time we met. So this bill addresses Governor Dill's executive order to suspend the collection of jet fuel tax. Under Governor Dill's brilliant leadership, his steadfast leadership, Georgia has been named the number one state in which to do business for 6 consecutive years in a row. We've been able to grow this state's economy by over 750,000 jobs. A big part of the reason we've been able to be successful in this area is because we have a low tax burden on businesses to help create these jobs. But we lag the country in this respect with the way we tax our jet fuel. In fact, we have the 4th highest fuel tax burden among the 21 states. This bill will ratify his executive order. It moves the jet fuel tax into the same code section as the motor fuel tax, which makes it to where the governor cannot exempt it again without a declaration of emergency, and it would require a 2/3 vote then to ratify that. The tax burden, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis other states, North Carolina, Texas, New York, and we live in a global economy where global transportation is vital to our economy. I know there's been some concern about what about our more rural and smaller airports, and we've had a good bit of discussion within the majority caucus about this, and I'm standing here today to commit to you that we're not going to forget about our rural airports. We are going to talk about this next year and come with an aggressive package to fully fund their infrastructure needs and be supportive of our rural airports. I know you all have studied this also, debated it at length. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Otherwise, I ask for your favorable vote on House Bill 5EX.
Senator from the 41st, you have a question. Speak. 21st, speak. Question.
Mr. President, is it not true that since the governor's executive order was signed, that one of our airlines has added 6 routes to enhance economic development in the state of Georgia?
Thank you for that question, Senator. That's absolutely true. We anticipate if we ratify this that we're going to see more routes added.
Senator from the 53rd, wish to be recognized. You're recognized this time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator, isn't it not true that I am an economic developer?
That's true.
Okay. Isn't it not true that I have taken classes and courses that prove by certification that I am an economic developer?
Yes, sir. You're very, very well renowned in your field.
Well-rounded. Thank you. That's not funny. Isn't it true that I think and I know this bill is all about economic development for the people of Georgia?
Yes, sir.
Isn't
Absolutely.
it not true that I also believe that this is a tax cut and would be a conservative position to vote yes?
That is correct. A vote yes is a tax cut.
Are there any other senators wishing to ask a question? There are a number of. All right, Senator from the 26th, you're recognized this time. There are a number of lights on, is why I'm asking. I'm not sure who wants the floor and who wants to ask a question.
Will the senator yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, vote for this. Would that mean that we can get a route into Macon Middle Georgia Airport now?
It would certainly help.
Chances are getting better. Chances are getting better.
This bill also includes a sunset provision. It will sunset June 30th, 2019.
Senator from the 29th, you wish to have the floor, and the 44th, you wish to have the floor. All right, no further questions, Senator.
Thank you. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from 41st.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I want to briefly rise on this important legislation. You know, we look at the jet fuel tax, and we know it is a source of revenue to our state between $44, $49 million. And we know that that revenue gives our teachers salaries, builds our infrastructure. You know, the airports need roads to get to them, need water lines, need infrastructure. We know it's important that we have revenue to do things for our state. We also know that in this case, there's been a lot of interest in the jet fuel revenue for years, because back in the late 80s, there was a raise of the state sales tax. It went up a penny. By federal statute, we should have dedicated that money to aviation. It wasn't always done. So there's been a lot of unreadiness. The governor told Delta basically that we were going to suspend collection of this tax. I think us as a legislative body should provide our clientele, our businesses and citizens with some logic, with something that they can make expectations and build their business plan or personal plans around. He made this promise, so therefore I support this legislation to suspend the collection and forgive that tax collection as the bill states. So I support that through June. I also appreciate the bill's refinements of the process, so the governor, you know, is not doing this again unless there's a state of emergency, and I appreciate those efforts in the bill. So I fully support the bill today. I'm just getting up to rise to you that this body, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, supported Senate Bill 378, which required us to look more closely as we do tax cuts in the future. And I think we should go forward. I think when we do tax cuts, we realize any tax cut can be used for, it can be stated that it's for economic development. We could cut motor fuel taxes at UPS and say it's for economic development. But everything should be studied. We know this is a significant amount of money. We know that teachers, for a 1% raise in Georgia, would need about $75 million. We know we haven't given them the raises over the last more than a decade, and that we are way behind in fulfilling that commitment to them. So what I am rising to say is that when we come back in January, we're not guaranteeing the jet fuel tax continue. And what I'm asking each of you to do is make sure the processes are in place for a very extensive analysis comparing our taxes to other states' taxes, our jet fuel and aviation needs compared to what other states have as far as infrastructure and our needs on it, and that when we come back during the regular session, we again visit this issue which I know you're all aware about, but I wanted to inform our constituents that we're going to be looking hard at this in the future as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 44th at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President and members of the Senate, I rise today to voice my support for House Bill 5EX. This legislation is a result of the compromise by all stakeholders. As you all well know, jet fuel taxation has a complicated history in this state. The issue most concerns me is revenue for Clayton County, and in particular, Clayton County Public Schools. I am pleased to say that after working with all interested parties, I, along with the rest of the Clayton County delegation, have protected local revenues from the sale of jet fuel. This will allow the county to continue to provide services expected by residents of my district. Additionally, this legislation is important to keep Georgia's economy competitive. Many states do not collect taxes on jet fuel, which means that airlines are more likely to schedule flights where they can fill up cheaper. As home to the world's busiest airport, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Georgia needs to ensure that we remain competitive with other states that have major airport hubs. Any shift in airline operations away from Hartsfield-Jackson will have a far more significant impact on the state's economy than the loss of jet fuel revenues. This legislation also contains a very important restriction on executive orders related to jet fuel tax suspensions. While I understand the governor's decision to suspend the tax after last year's political snafu, these sorts of decisions should be done by the legislature. Contained in this bill is a provision that would make suspending jet fuel taxes work the same as suspending motor fuel taxes. The taxes could only be suspended in the case of a declared emergency. And to permanently forgive the tax liability, the legislature would have to ratify the executive order by a 2/3 supermajority, not just a simple majority. Those are important protections to ensure that the legislature retains its control over the state revenue. Finally, the primary recipient of this benefit will be Delta Airlines, which has been a long-term asset for the region. Well, Delta is Georgia's largest private employer with more than 33,000 employees statewide, many living in Clayton County. It is also Georgia's largest corporate charitable donor, contributing $12 million a year to charities across the state, and that's important to me. In conclusion, the most important aspect of this bill is that all parties involved have been extremely respectful to Clayton County's needs and protected its local revenue in this bill. With my constituents protected and the other economic benefits from maintaining a strong air travel industry, I think this bill is a positive bill for Georgia and Georgia's economy. Mr. President, if there are no questions, I yield the well.
No questions, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator the 29th. Speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, none of us asked to be here in special session today on a Saturday morning, but here we are. I think I'd like to begin by just sharing with you one of my favorite films. It's the Shawshank Redemption. I don't know if you've ever seen the Shawshank Redemption, but it takes place in a prison in Maine. And there's a character in the film named Red, played by Morgan Freeman. His real name is Ellis Redding. Now, Red is in prison for life, but he has the possibility of parole. And there are 3 parole hearings you see as the film plays out. One takes place in 1947, one in 1957, and one in 1967. And in the first 2 hearings, he tries to say what he thinks the parole board wants to hear so they'll turn him loose. And of course, it gets denied both times. And then finally, he has his 3rd hearing. He's been in prison for over 30 years. And it's probably not appropriate for me to quote what he says in the movie, but he's very blunt with the parole board at that time. And they actually grant his release. I've often wondered about that scene in the film and why he bothered to go to the 3rd parole hearing, because he clearly thought that the fix was in. But at the end of the film, Red talks about hope and enduring hope. And I think when he went there that 3rd and final time, there was some small part of him that was hoping he might win his freedom. And in answering that question, or telling you that story, I answer the question that some of you may have about why I would speak to this bill today. Minds have probably been made up at this point, and why I would be as blunt as I intend to be today. But it's because I hold out some hope that even though in the 8 years I've served here, I've generally supported the governor when he was right, which was more often, much more often, than when he was wrong. But on a handful of occasions, I have opposed special tax breaks for special interests or favored industries. And my opposition has continued, even though I've never seen the governor fail to pass a bill in this chamber that he was supporting in the 8 years I've served, and that the outcome of the vote is usually similar to a basketball game between the Harlem Globetrotters and the Washington Generals. It's usually not very close. But I, like Red, hold out some small hope that this time might be different. When I learned about the planned call for a special session by reading a news report which discussed hurricane relief funding, I asked myself, what is the real reason we are being called into special session? Because while I certainly support the work that was done here this week and today in the Senate, and I think it's unlikely the public at large realizes this, there are procedures in place for emergency funding to be allocated without calling the legislature into session. And indeed, that is why we have compiled a balance of over $2 billion into the rainy day account. The tragedy that has befallen South Georgia clearly qualifies as a justifiable circumstance to use some of the rainy day fund. But if we aren't here to vote on hurricane relief, which could have been handled without calling a special session, why then were we being called into special session? And it became clear reading the call that was issued that we were here to have another round of debate over the jet fuel tax break. I've opposed this measure from the beginning. I think that's an important point to make. Regardless of the relationships of private airlines and political organizations, that doesn't really have anything to do with it. It shouldn't enter into the analysis. Bad public policy is bad public policy. The legislature that will be seated in January should be deciding this question. And calling this session was a mistake. But as I said, we are here, and we are here being asked to resolve the question, so let's get to it. To understand my opposition to this measure, I need to spend a few minutes discussing our public policy on fuel taxes more generally. In 2015, some members here will remember when the administration asked the legislature to raise $900 million in revenue, including raising the gasoline tax and imposing a $5 per night hotel-motel tax. We were told at that time from this well multiple times that it was absolutely necessary to raise this revenue to improve our ailing infrastructure, our roads and bridges, and that motorists and travelers should be the ones to pay for these improvements and upgrades. While I disagreed with the amount of taxes being levied, it was hard to argue with the proposition that the users of the system should pay for the system. Now this same administration is asking the legislature to end the tax on jet fuel in our state. I'll come back to the sunset, but for today's purposes, we're ending the collection of jet fuel taxes in our state. Federal law requires that the revenue generated by this tax be spent on aviation infrastructure. Many of us have airports in our districts. I can tell you in District 29, we have, of course, the airport in Columbus that has commercial service, but we also have LaGrange Callaway Airport, the Harris County Airport, and Roosevelt Memorial Airport in Warm Springs. During my 8 years as a senator, I have gone multiple times to request funding for runway improvements, lengthening the runway, adding hangar space. These are not inexpensive endeavors. And some of you may not know this, but there are over 100 general aviation airports in our state. There are a lot of needs for those airports in our state. The viability of the airports I'm describing in my district are critical for economic development in my district. It is absolutely necessary for recruitment of new economic development prospects and to maintain employers important in communities I represent. So as you consider the economic development argument, remember commercial and general aviation airports in our state and the vital role they play in our economy. It's definitely part of the climate that has made our state the #1 state in which to do business. And the revenue generated by this tax should be dedicated so it is available fully for this critical component of our transportation infrastructure. While much has been said regarding the $40 million generated in state tax, there is roughly another $25 million collected by local communities. This leads me to my next question, which is, if we do what is proposed before us today, how will we pay for airport infrastructure going forward? The answer is we will pay for it out of the general fund. Who pays for the general fund? Of course, that would be all Georgia taxpayers. So let me share stories with you of two such taxpayers. Last week, I had lunch with a friend of mine in Columbus at Red Lobster. As we had our lunch, we had the occasion to visit with our waitress. We learned she was a single mother with 3 children. She works 2 jobs, and she's working incredibly hard to provide for her family without asking the government for a handout. Now, she gets in her car every day to drive from home to work, from home to getting her kids from childcare. She's got to drive a car. She's paying her taxes. This morning, I took Uber to the Capitol. My Uber driver was telling me about her Thanksgiving travel plans. Her extended family lives in Miami, Florida, and she's traveling there for the holiday. She cannot afford to fly, so she's driving there. She too is working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I want to mention one other group of taxpayers, and those are the family members I see routinely who come to Columbus to celebrate a proud moment when their child graduates from infantry school at Fort Benning. And when we welcome them to Columbus, we require them to pay a $5 per night tax on a $40 per night hotel room. So why not, these people are Georgia taxpayers. They are paying at the pump, and they are paying sales taxes at a minimum. These people are representative of millions of Georgians who we are asking today, by passing this bill, to subsidize the operation of an industry they cannot even afford to utilize. More routes to more places or marginally lower fares don't help them one bit. So why not some tax relief for these ladies or the families I mentioned on the fuel tax they pay? Why are we asking people who live paycheck to paycheck to pay this tax while exempting an entire industry from paying fuel taxes during a time of record profits? I would say the reason for this disparate treatment is that these people I've been talking about this morning are the forgotten men and women of our country who President Trump talked about in his inaugural address. These people cannot afford to hire a trade group to put a letter on our desks, a letter like this one that you may have seen. These people cannot afford to hire someone who used to work for the governor to advocate on their behalf, because they are spending every free moment taking care of their children and working to pay the bills and to hold their families together. I submit to you that our focus should be on the forgotten men and women, not special interests looking for a sweetheart deal. It is my hope, as I've shared these thoughts with you today, I'm sorry. If this is good public policy, why are we sunsetting it in 7 months from now? What will change between today and 2 months from now when the newly seated legislature takes office? If you believe this is good policy today, then it should be sunset several years out, not 7 months out. Now, having said all of this, I am willing to compromise. I am willing to support the bill with the amendment offered by the senator from the 31st. I don't like it, but it would avoid the confusion of collecting taxes retroactively and end this practice definitively on December 31st. This is a reasonable compromise on what I find to be an otherwise distasteful measure. I do want to say a brief word to my friends in the minority caucus who have supported measures similar to this one in the past. It is difficult to take your calls for more spending on Medicaid, transit, and education seriously when you support corporate welfare like this bill before us today. It is my hope that even if I fail in my effort today, that I will have honored the commitment I made 8 years ago and that our president made 2 years ago to fight for the forgotten men and women of our country with every breath in my body to ensure they will be forgotten no longer. I know others in good faith in this chamber may disagree with me today, but I hope that my service will be remembered in fighting for those without a voice, and my vocal opposition to this measure is in keeping with that tradition. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Shawshank in 1995 was beat out by Forrest Gump. Was a movie of the year. So, best picture. Who do you think knows Georgia best? Forrest Gump. Chair recognizes Senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I rise on a different note than the senator from the 29th. I appreciate the call of the governor to tackle matters that face Southwest Georgia. I appreciate the call of the governor to tackle matters that have faced folks who are just to the west of me in the state who are experiencing incredible difficulties. And I appreciate that call here today because I know that that benefits 10.5 million Georgians. I do, though, separate myself. I agree with him partly, though, although I separate myself from him on that, on this bill. We're here to represent 10.5 million Georgians. We're here to represent 177,000 people who call where we do home. And this bill, I do not see where that helps the 10.5 million Georgians that we represent as a whole, and particularly the 177,000 that I represent back in Southeast Georgia. You see, this bill also, while it takes $39 million from state funds, it also takes about $26 million from local funds. And of those $26 million from local funds, $6 million roughly are not in Hartsville. They're spread around our state. To my communities, to Jeff Davis County, that's about $3,000. To Toombs County, it's about $6,000. To Wayne County, it's about $3,000 as well. And while I've been told and while I do understand those dollar figures are low, their percentage of their airport budget is actually pretty high. That's a whole percent of their airport budget in Jeff Davis. That's a little bit over that in Toombs. It's almost 2% in Wayne County. And some people may still say, well, those percentages are low too. They don't matter. Well, if they don't matter, then $40 million to a company with profits of $5 billion, well, that's only 0.4% or 25% less than that. Those are the percentages in my counties, but those aren't the only ones affected. Gwinnett County sees a local effect on this bill of $95,000 a year. Glenn County, $119,000 a year. Richmond, $281,000 a year. DeKalb, $718,000 a year. Albany, an area that we're here to help because it's been destroyed by storms, $46,000 a year. I've asked the Secretary of the Senate if they would key up a map if they have it. And that's a map. I know it's sort of hard to see, but those are your airports. Those are the areas you represent. Those areas will see a deduction as well, not just of the $39 or $40 million of state funds, but of local funds as well. And we've heard the argument that the FAA requires this. Well, there's ways to tailor that. We know there are. I'm resigned. I understand that I may be in the minority today on my vote, but we may come back and affect this again next year. And I would ask that, I'll tell you, there are ways that we can make sure that this bill would benefit the 177,000 I represent and the 11 million, 10.5 million that all of us collectively represent. The senator from the 22nd talked about this. The senator from the 41st echoed it about making sure these tax breaks work for all Georgians. The senator from the 21st talked about more flights. The senator from the 26th talked about flights out of regional airports. But none of those things are here and included or guaranteed in this bill. You see, if we wanted to make sure those 10.5 million people were also benefiting, we would reduce taxes on something else, find another way to reduce those taxes. We could find ways to support those local airports where we're taking that $6 million out on local money. We could treat this like we do other economic development projects and tie it to a minimum number of jobs so that we aren't facing a threat that other jobs leave our area every year when we gather in this General Assembly. We could tie that credit to a number of flights out of regional airports, out of Columbus, out of Valdosta, out of Macon, Brunswick, or Albany. We could also tie that rate or that credit to something novel, completely outside the box. We could create and make sure it benefits all 10.5 million Georgians by creating a new group rate. Isn't that what got us here to begin with, a group rate? What if that new group rate, though, was not for the AARP or for any other entity, but it was Citizen of Georgia? And if you booked your flight and you used your address as Georgia, that you got that lowest group rate in exchange for the tax credit going to these commercial carriers. It's just something we want to think about for next time. Now, I understand that I've made my decision on what I think this does to the 177,000 people I represent, and that each of you now get to make the decision on how you think it affects the 177,000 that you represent. Thank you, Mr. President. If there are no questions, I'll yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 31st to speak to his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I have, hopefully, we'll be able to combine my thoughts on the bill as a whole and the amendment. The amendment is very simple. I think you can comprehend what that does. I had placed on your desk an information packet, and it's a lot of information. I just wanted to briefly kind of tell you what's in this. First page is a list of jet fuel prices that I put together yesterday. And there's an average at the end. You will see the average of all of them, $4.52. And then as you dig down a little bit deeper, I've broken this out by different categories of airports. And what you'll find when you get down to level 1, there's a lot of empty blanks. Those are because we have airports that do not sell jet fuel. Now, why might they choose to not sell jet fuel? It's because the runways are not long enough to get an airplane in there or enough different types of aircraft in there that consumes jet fuel. Georgia has, I believe, 109 airports, general aviation airports. I think it's important that we support those. And to get on through the handout, the very last page is a study that I conducted back in February of this year when we were talking about this issue then. And what we found is that for me, living in West Georgia, I can go to Birmingham and get on an airplane fly to Atlanta and get on the same airplane that you would board in Atlanta. Only the airlines, this is one particular airline, they'll actually pay me to get on in Birmingham, and then they'll fly me to Atlanta. It's cheaper. The first kind of grayed out column, you get to the bottom, you know, the total of this was some of these flights, some $3,500 cheaper to get on flights outside this state to get to the airport to get on the flight that goes where you want to go. So I wondered what happens whenever you cut a minimal amount of tax on fuel from the cost. You would expect the ticket prices would go down and reflect that. And in fact, they do. Ticket prices have gone, you'll see the comparison if you go left or right on the page, you'll see that these flights have gotten quite a bit cheaper. But they've gotten much more cheaper if you get on that flight from somewhere other than Georgia. My point is, the people that pay this tax are at the mercy of market conditions. The vendors of these flights will charge all they can get by with for the market that they're in. Now, some have said that this is a tax cut, and while you can say that, the consumer pays all taxes. A study of ticket prices, as I said, point out that it's cheaper to get on flights other places. And then I ask you, who's going to maintain our aviation infrastructure? If we continue the tax on jet fuel, it is the users of this system that pays for the maintenance of our airports. And our airports are very important. If we don't tax the users of that system, and if we do what some have so eloquently stated that they will support funding our airports, then that means that we've got to take those funds from other things like health care and education that dominates the bulk of our budget. Some have said our jet fuel tax puts Georgians at a competitive disadvantage to other states. Well, clearly that's not reflected in the ticket prices for flights originating in Georgia. It's good for economic development. If that's so, consider what an elimination of the hotel-motel tax would do to make Georgia a welcoming state. According to GDOT, there is some $2 billion needed over the next 10 years for the development and maintenance of Georgia's aviation resources. If we were able to totally leverage the federal dollars, and the best match you get is a 90-10 split, we would need $200 million over the next 10 years to support our airports. Now, I will remind you that you can't get that 90% match on all the projects that we need. Imagine what an infusion of $200 billion in construction and engineering work in this state would do. That would employ people all across this state. According to GDOT's statewide airport economic impact study, more than 82,000 people are directly employed at Georgia's airports with a payroll of over $5.9 billion. Attracting international and out-of-state companies to our state will require an airport system that can accommodate those corporate aircraft that their executives and management personnel fly in. Let me also point out that Georgia has some 4,800 based aircraft here. That's a tremendous amount of income for local governments in ad valorem tax. Those airplanes, for the most part, are based at airports. I'll also, there's been some allusion to, or some hint of companies that manufacture aircraft in this state, and that they might support this elimination of fuel tax. So I can tell you that if you manufacture an aircraft, of course you put some fuel in them to test them out and to demonstrate them and all those kind of things. But that aircraft is of no use to you if there's not an airport that you can land that airplane in. Now there are some major air carriers in this state, one of which had a press release on October the 24th stating that it had paid dividends to its shareholders for the 22nd consecutive quarter. This particular airline, according to their news releases on their website, purchased a refinery in 2012 for $150 million, and in 2015 we're expecting $300 million in revenue from that $150 million investment. Now, we're all about helping those who need help the most. This particular airline in 2015, the AJC reported it had paid out nearly $5 billion in profit sharing in the past 5 years. And of course, if they paid dividends for 22 consecutive quarters, their shareholders benefit as well. Now, some have said, why would we want a 12/31 date? Well, there is some logistics to re-implementing the system of collecting and remitting this tax that we should be collecting from the users of the system, and this would give them a little bit of time while still collecting the taxes to support our aviation infrastructure. Let me also point out, if you've taken time to look at the fiscal note on this, it says the fiscal impact is some $45 to $50 million in a year based on $2.17 a gallon jet fuel. You look at the numbers I provided you, you will see that that's not the case today, that this would be double that. Now, admittedly, an airline that has its own refinery, I'm not sure how we tax that. Do we tax it on the raw products that goes into the manufacture of jet fuel, or do we tax them at the rate that everyone else would pay? So my request is, and while I support much of the measures in the bill that's before you, I think that we should collect this jet fuel tax and invest in this very valuable infrastructure that this state has. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out, according to GDOT, we have invested in our airports less than any state that joins us. I spoke to some yesterday. I am a pilot, full disclosure. I have, over the last couple of years, had several occasions where I needed to fly into South Carolina to conduct some business. And folks, there was not an airport suitable for me to fly my Cessna into to do my business. The runway was there, but there's no fixed base operation, no way to buy fuel, no way to rent a car, no way to check weather and to file flight plans and what have you when we get there. So to say that we have invested in our aviation infrastructure less than the state of South Carolina is a disgrace. And the legislature's had that ability. And we have put some money in our airports. But we need a consistent revenue source to fund this very valuable asset that we have, and we've got to maintain it. And it is only because we have these assets that we can attract these international and out-of-state companies. I'll give you one more story. I was at our local airport a few weeks ago. There was a business that's located nearby there. This big jet came in. It was a pretty large corporate jet. It might have been a Gulfstream. I'm not rich enough to recognize all these oil burners. But this big jet taxied up to the FBO. About 8 or 10 folks got out of there, walked about as far as from here to that door, got in I think it was four different rental cars, and left. I asked the guys there, I said, who is that? They said, oh, that's a company that's located in town here. In 5 minutes, well, let's say 10 minutes after that airplane landed, those executives, or whoever that was, that flew from Washington State, by the way, to our community, was on the job and working. Now, they could have gone to Hartsville. You know how long it takes to get your bags and get out of Hartsville? Maybe an hour after the plane leaves, you'd be over at the rental car facility. And then you could have driven an hour back to where they were. So the amendment just simply says that we will reinstate the collection of this fuel tax, a tax on the users, on December 31 instead of June 30th. I would urge your support on that. I urge your support on the bill. And I hope that those who have talked so eloquently about their support of our infrastructure will honor that in the future years and allow us to maintain this valuable asset that we got. Mr. President, I'll be glad to answer questions if there are any, but I am ready to take my seat if not.
Chair recognizes Senator on the 20th on a question.
Senator, would you yield?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that I agree with you that all of our airports are vital to the communities they serve, and that I fully support infrastructure funding for improvements to our rural airports in particular?
If you say that, I want to believe you.
Will you fully yield?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that the state sales tax on jet fuel is not dedicated to infrastructure improvements on airport, but instead goes into the general fund?
You're right, and that is in conflict with the federal regulations that say that on, not all jet fuel, to be perfectly clear, but I believe on a date after 1987, taxes that were implemented were supposed to be spent on those airports, and we have not been doing that, even though there are many in the legislature over the years who have tried to get that in place. The FAA clearly recognizes that our aviation infrastructure of this country is important, and because of states like Georgia, for whatever reason, that was not putting that money back into the infrastructure, just drawing from it, they have a regulation or rule that states that that money should be reinvested in airports. And let me say, to continue on that, perhaps we're overtaxing jet fuel. And if that be the case, I would fully support a reduction in that rate. And as a general aviation pilot that doesn't consume jet fuel, but instead avgas, I think that that money should also be put in the pool to support our airports.
Will the Senator further yield?
I do.
Is it not true that I agree that's a discussion that we need to have, but that's not the bill before us today?
Part of that discussion is not a part of this bill, and absolutely we should have been having this discussion for years and have had the discussion, but the General Assembly, for whatever reason, has not chosen to do the right thing.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator on the 13th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Senator yield for a series of 3 questions?
Yes, sir.
First of all, Senator, isn't it true that we're dealing with this because of an executive order that's really overturning an issue that we dealt with in the General Assembly earlier this year and said no to?
You're right. This issue has been up a number of times, and the General Assembly has refused to act on this, and the governor did take an executive order on July the 30th to take place on August the 1st.
Isn't it also true that this amendment of yours will end that executive order sooner rather than later?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it also true, Senator, that I spoke with my insurance company just yesterday about the damages to my business from this storm? And in that conversation, I made a comment about the devastation in South Georgia and that so many people their homes were damaged and just devastated, and how I even hated to call and ask about my issues because I see others who are in greater need, and that the most important issue in this special session is to deal with helping people devastated by this storm and not corporate issues?
Yes, sir, and we have strongly supported that already this morning. But I will tell you that there were also airports devastated by this storm, and they are important to your community, and we need to support those airports and have the funds to maintain them.
And this amendment would help us do that quicker.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes Senator from the 42nd for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I do.
You probably said this, Senator, and I probably missed it. Enlighten me as to what your column Jet A price is.
Jet A is jet fuel.
Okay.
It's referred, there are some different grades of jet fuel, but generally it's Jet A that's available. I just use that because it was shorter than saying jet fuel. That is the price of the fuel that we're talking about at the various airports across the state.
And the price varies quite a bit depending on the size of the airport, it looks like.
It does, but admittedly, the airlines don't pay the, whatever it is, $7 or $8 that is listed for Hartsville. That's what a general aviation pilot would pay if they go into Hartsville.
Thank you.
There are no further questions, Senator.
Well, I had a request this morning that whenever I spoke to you that I would smile. And so for the benefit of those that didn't recognize this as a smile, I will give you something that you all think is a smile. Have a great day.
We're ready to vote. The only issue on amendment number 1, it is actually out of order because you are attempting to amend the substitute, and the substitute is not in front of us. Any other senator wish to speak for or against the bill? As the objection agreed, the Porter Committee which fail to pass the bill. Chairs and none. The Porter Committee is agreed to. All those in favor of the bill vote aye. Those opposed no. Secretary, unlike the machine. Chair recognizes Senator from 31st.
Mr. President, the amendment before us clearly states that it is to amend LC 431050S, and it is a substitute that came out of the House.
It's not, you are amending not the substitute, you would be amending House Bill 5EX.
Which is the bill that we have before us. The LC numbers match up. It is a substitute that came out of the House, and I think the amendment is in order.
It's not the way I interpret it, Senator. You're voting on final passage of SB 5EX. On the passage of House Bill 5EX, the yeas are 43, the nays are 19, and this bill of city records constitutional majority is therefore adopted. Chair recognizes Senator from the 30th.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned. Sine die.
The The senator from the 30th has moved that we adjourn sine die. All those in favor will vote aye. No, sine die. We're adjourned.